very happy to welcome everybody to this interview with Agnieszka Holland. My name is Johannes von Moltke. I'm currently the acting director of the Center for European Studies, which is my main function here, but I'm also a professor of film, television, and media at the University of Michigan.
And I am Benjamin Paloff, Associate Professor of Slavic Languages and Literatures and of Comparative Literature and Acting Director of the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies at the University of Michigan. It is my great honor to welcome back, if virtually, to Ann Arbor, Agnieszka Holland, an acclaimed international filmmaker who will be well known to Ann Arbor audiences. She was last in Ann Arbor some 8 years ago, also as our Copernicus lecturer. Agnieszka Holland studied at the Film and TV School of the Academy of Performing Arts in Prague with Milos Forman and Ivan Passer. And during this time, she witnessed and participated in the Prague Spring. She launched her film career in Poland through her collaboration with Andrzej Wajda and Krzysztof Zanushi, winning prizes and accolades for her first feature-length film, Provincial Actors, at the Cannes Film Festival in 1980. Holland received Academy Award nominations for Angry Harvest, 1985, Europa Europa from 1990, which was also nominated for a Golden Globe, and her film In Darkness in 2012. And she has directed multiple episodes of acclaimed television series, including The Wire, Treme, The Killing, and House of Cards. Her screenwriting career includes classics such as Krzysztof Kieślowski's Blue, Andrzej Wajda's Rough Treatment, and Korczak, as well as Bogajewicz's Anna. Her most recent films include Mr. Jones, about the Ukrainian famine of the early 1930s, Spore, based on the novel by Nobel Literature Laureate Olga Tokarczuk, and most recently, Charlatan from 2020. So thank you, Agnieszka Holland, for joining us for this conversation.
My pleasure.
Yes, let me add my thanks too. It's exciting and good to see you again. And I wish it could be in person, but we'll have to wait. So by the time this video interview airs or gets posted, we hope that people will have had an opportunity to have seen Charlatan, and if not, we hope they'll have an opportunity fairly soon. But I thought we'd start broadly, not specifically on that film, by talking briefly about your obvious interest in history and politics. Virtually all of your films deal with what you've called the perversely captivating 20th century. You've also spoken of the circus of the 20th century as the key to our own modernity, a figure that I always find very appealing, as the kind of thinking of history as always the prehistory of the present. At the heart of the century, as is also obvious from your films, lie the twin evils of fascism and Stalinism. Now, if we're not mistaken, your work has moved from an emphasis on fascism to a more pronounced interest in Stalinism and communism, with series like Burning Bush, films like Mr. Jones, or in an interesting combination that I'd love to talk about also, Charlatan. So our first question is simply whether you'd agree with this characterization that you've gravitated more towards addressing the history of communism recently, and if so, what's prompted that?
Well, I was balancing it to some extent in Europe Eurasia. Of course, the fascism and the Nazi crimes have been, and the Holocaust issue was more important in this film. But in some point, I shown also the Soviet experience of the young hero, and it is even his dream where Stalin and Hitler are dancing together, which was quite subversive, especially for French audience. Because they never wanted to make some kind of the symmetry between Stalinian and Nazi crimes. In my experience, me being the daughter of Jewish father and living in communist Poland and then Czechoslovakia and then back Poland in my life, I experienced somehow the shadows and the reality of both. And as much as the Nazism and the Holocaust especially entered the global conscience of the humanity and became something like the global knowledge, at least in our culture in the West, uh, the communist crimes vanished from the memory of the people and from the global conscience exactly, and been somehow forgotten and forgiven. And I remember when thinking if I have to make Mr. Jones or not, I was reading the survey made in Russia some years ago, where the answer to the question who was the greatest leader in the history of Russia, the majority answered that it was Joseph Stalin.
Yeah.
I found it chilling. Uh, and you know, by the end, when we compare, when we forgot the initial ideas of the Nazism and communism, initial ideas have been very different, so to say. So the practice of that, the mechanism of that, and the aim of the people who've been leading the countries under those regimes have been very similar.
Right.
So for the little human being, I'm not speaking of the Jews who've been the special category in Nazi regimes, but for regular citizen of Central Europe, somehow um, they passed their life passed from one to another regime, and the consequences have been quite similar in terms of their capacity to decide about their life, the essential rights and essential freedoms.
This seems that seems to me almost an answer to the question I had to follow up. Although I'll still ask it because I'd be interested. I mean, what you're describing is essentially the thesis of totalitarianism, right? That despite their differences, the fascist and the Stalinist regime join in certain characteristics. So I was interested to see that the title character in Charlatan has to kill for the Germans, he has to heal Nazis, and he stands trial by the communists. And a viewer who sees your film for the first time would be forgiven for seeing all these evil antagonists as somehow interchangeable, although at second glance, it does seem that the film distinguishes between the drab communist regime and the early Nazis by its color scheme. So the Nazis seem to be brighter than the communists. I think the color scheme is really interesting visually in the film. I'm curious if you could speak to the parallels that you want to draw between the Nazis and the communists, and where the distinctions also lie, including in that film.
I think that is better visible in Mijan's, the distinctions. I will maybe come back to the reason I had when I was doing my Holocaust movies. I was feeling very strongly, it was the intuition, not really the knowledge, that the Second World War never ended. That the past is not really the past, it's not that, it's the latent possibility in the present, and that if we will be not really taking lessons from this experience, one of the wars for the humanity, it can come back. It started to be more sensible in like about 10 years ago, especially after the economical crisis in 2008, when we started to feel that the vaccine of the Holocaust is like evaporating. It's going away somehow.
Mm-hmm.
In the same time, the communists fall apart. It means the regimes like the Soviet regime ended. My native Poland or half native Czechoslovakia became let's say, free country, of the liberal democracy and with the aspiration to be the members, and then really being the members of European Union and NATO, and being the states of rights. And then after the while, we started to feel that these old demons, the old monsters, are coming back. And we have to go back to 30s somehow. And this like feeling that we are in some kind of 30s, including, Hispanic pandemic and economical crisis, and the incredible polarization inside of the societies, and the blooming state nationalism, it's quite wide. Of course, it's always the danger to make the straight analogy. It's why I try, when doing historical movies, to be pretty faithful to the facts and to the possible feelings of the time. In the same time, I'm interested by that only when it seems to be relevant to me. So it's the mix of the actualization and and the history, which I'm interested in, and the context of a story of Mr. Jones, who is speaking about the Holodomor, one of the worst Stalinian crime, the orchestrated famine, especially in Ukraine, but it touched the much wider territories. And which costed the life of, we don't know how many people, because the historians make the estimation between 3.5 and 8 millions, which shows us how terrible it is that the victims are even not counted. They are nameless, numberless, and voiceless. But another subject, and maybe somehow even more important for today, is the subject of the manipulation by the media, and the manipulation by the regimes of the media, corruption of the media, the incredibly efficient production of the fake news, alternative realities, and the straight propaganda, which was very efficient then, even without internet. And now with the internet and social media, it becomes it's spreading with the rapidity of the light.
In English, we might say it's spreading like wildfire, but I don't want to make that. I don't want to use that turn of phrase right now because we actually have wildfire spreading like wildfire.
I know.
But can I follow up with this? I have just one follow-up question about this. Because I remember a discussion maybe 15, 20 years ago, not just in one place, but it was kind of common in Eastern European studies for there to be these light conversations about why it is that all of a sudden, maybe 15 years ago or so, we were seeing so much Soviet kitsch in popular culture, people wearing T-shirts with a hammer and sickle, or SSR or something like this written across, right? That Soviet iconography became part of popular culture in a way that we could not imagine Nazi iconography becoming part of popular culture. And the academics were debating why this is, and the consensus was that, well, there was a process of de-Stalinization, which made people think, okay, we've corrected the problem. Whereas there never was a process of denazification. The Nazi regime came to a much more abrupt halt. But what I hear you saying is that, well, it seems that some people actually have a taste for authoritarianism. And that's why I wanted to ask, is this why you're making these movies now? Is it important to... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, please.
Well, is it important to make a movie that is, because as you say, you're not drawing you're careful not to draw a very close comparison, but you are presenting audiences with a kind of reminder of the way that common people become complicit in injustice. And is that really as much about today as it is about then?
Yes, yes, as you said. Uh, I think that the reason why we've been not shocked by communist or even Stalinian symbols or Che Guevara or and other symbols like that on our T-shirts or posters, it is somehow explained, maybe partly also in Mr. Jones, when it's shown that for the entire humanity and certainly for its more compassionate and part, the Soviet Union and the communists was incredible hope. And it was practically only hope in the world where the capitalism before and during the Second War, and especially during the big crisis, shown its ugly face. It was especially a hope that in the ideas of the communists, which was not so very different from, I don't know, the gospel and Christian ideas of the beginning, was something which all humanity was able to connect. And in reality, I think that the global public opinion never condemned communism. At least in most of the countries, it never happened. And it remained as a latent and possible hope. And we see that the not very powerful but existing communist youth in different countries, even in Poland, which are referring openly to the vocabulary of the communism. We see also the youth and more numerous referring to the vocabulary of fascism or Nazism. And Nazism was always connected, it was the idea connected only with Germany. It was national idea, it wasn't global idea. Fascism more so, but Nazis certainly was not. So it was easier somehow, to write it out. The people out of Germany never really connected to that. They connected to some parts of that, like racism, for example, or national megalomany or narcissism, but not to the, to the broad and complete spectrum of ideas. And now what we are seeing, the communism is maybe because its fall was more recent, the communism is somehow, somehow not so attractive. And the new populism, which quite often turns toward the authoritarian regimes with the ambition to be totalitarian, they are more connected to the right wing utopia than to the left wing utopia, using the element of both, a bit like exactly national socialism, which was Nazi. So I will tell, but in the same time they are using the methods of that and the strategy, or rather tactic of that, and the tools. For example, tools of propaganda and tools of the division, divide impera, and tools of manipulation of the media and of the truth, and spreading the fear, and finding the enemy, the scapegoat, which will explain the inefficiency of the, of the governors. So, but they are deprived of the lively ideology. We don't have the fresh ideology, right or left or new religion or whatever. We don't have it. It's some kind of the recycling of the old and using the same requisite, the same symbol, the same vocabulary, the same tools, but it's nothing new in that. What is new in reality is the different challenges and different dangers of the modernity, which are very different from 20th century, because we have new elements which are completely new, extremely challenging. And And the regimes are using old tools when dealing with the new problems, so they cannot be efficient even for the short period of the time. We can see it with the reaction to the pandemic by the regimes like by the leaders like Donald Trump or Bolsonaro um, or others of the kind.
Mm-hmm.
Can I pick up on the populism motif, because I think it's fascinating both in two ways in your work. One is the relationship between populism and institutions. So you spoke about the press and the importance of the free press, and Mr. Jones begins and ends as a movie about a journalist, and the other would be maybe the courtroom, the judiciary. And it seems to me that the courtroom plays an important role, certainly in Burning Bush, but also, even though it's perverted, in Charlatan. I mean, the power of the courtroom drama as a trope in cinema is something that you know very well in your work. So one of my questions is about the relationship, the kind of the importance of institutions to fend off populism when we don't know how else to fend it off. Well, and the other question would be, but I'll wait for that. The other question would be about Mikulášek's politics, but let's stick with the institutions first.
So, I think that Timothy Snyder in the Black Earth, in his book about Holocaust, stated that in the places where Holocaust was the worst and the most efficient as a genocide, was the places where the institutions didn't exist, the institutions of the state. But for me, it's sure that the institutions are not only, but the most efficient barrier against the populistic temptations. It's why the first thing the populists are attacking are institutions. The first things Kaczynski in Poland was attacking, it was the judiciary. And he succeeded, unfortunately, to destroy the institutions, but not yet destroyed the people, the servant of those institutions. And big part of the judges and other lawyers are defending with the great courage after more than 5 years, their freedom and independence with some mixed results, let's say. It's also why they want to attack the media. Media are not the institution per se, but for example, in countries like Hungary or Poland, they attacked the public media and they practically corrupted public media. They don't exist as a public anymore. They are the voice of one ruling party. So yes, they are attacking the institutions because they know that the people are much easier to corrupt, let's say, than the institutions, especially if you have some traditions of the democracy. But even in the countries when you don't have very deep traditions of the democracy, the fight for institutions becomes the reason to wake up for many people.
Can I ask one more follow-up question on charlatan and populism, and then I'll let my colleague ask some questions too. So in thinking about charlatan, I found myself wondering about the title character's politics, not least because of the title that you give the movie, which I think is very interesting. So Mikulášek he's antithetical to the regime, but he doesn't exactly strike me as somebody who enacts a politics of resistance. And I wondered at moments whether one might call him a populist. He has a teacher who admonishes him that all that leads you away from the people is evil for the herbalist. He's an herbalist. And indeed, judging by the lines in front of his house, the lines of people in front of his house, he does seem to have the people on his side. But is he, in fact, a charlatan who uses the people for his own ends? It struck me suddenly, after I'd seen the movie, that today Mikulášek would fit comfortably with the anti-vaxxers, who in turn have entered unholy alliances, both in the US and in Germany, with the populist alt-right. So What are Mikulášek's politics?
Well, I was approached with this kind of the fear by some of my friends, doctors and journalists. But I think that the character in the film, um, he's in terms of his like medical approach, he's not a charlatan. At least it wasn't my intention to make him one, because he knows his limits. He knows his limits, and he is not pretending that he can help more than he really can. Let's say the question is if his gifts are real. But actually he exercised so long time, and he was tested so many times by the medical corps of Nazis, and also before the Second War by the Czechoslovakian doctors. And he collaborated with the doctors, with the regular medicine as well. Even one of the head of the hospital in Prague, Bulovka Hospital, was sending him the samples of the urine of the patients if it was difficult to make the diagnosis. And his recipes as a herbalist reminded and are used by the herbalists and regular doctors till now. So let's say that he was just the special case of somebody with a very special gift, but his a part of his intuition, his skills and his practice was based on some kind of the rational ground. But yeah, and it was very easy for him to become this kind of the shaman, or the charlatan, and he never fell into this temptation. Not too much anyway, maybe a little sometimes. And a part of his narcissism and some kind of the like megalomaniac way to build up his persona, the main price he was paying for the consequence he was like sacrificing his life for this gift was the loneliness, and somehow it's excusable. His conformism is excusable because because his main goal was to heal the people as much as he was able of. So he was able to sacrifice some like moral or ethical things in order to exercise his vocation. I didn't, I wanted really to make it very subtle, the bad and good. Yeah, he was not sympathetic character, but in the same time he was able of the incredible generosity, and he was the coward in some situation, but he was very, like brave in others. So it is somehow it is the citizen of the Central Europe in the first part of 20th century who tries to survive in the best way, not to waste his life, let's say.
That response kind of bleeds seamlessly into the next topic, in fact, that Johannes and I had already decided we wanted to discuss, and that has to do with morality in your films. Morality is a consistent interest in your movies. In Central European cinema, and I think this is sort of true, I think in any popular media, we usually have pretty clear lines between right and wrong and the good guys and the bad guys. It's usually pretty simple. But your films frequently feature heroes whose circumstances, just the circumstances alone, make clean lines between morality and immorality blurry. I was thinking when I was first started formulating this as a question, I was thinking about the film Europa and the impression it made upon me when it came out. I was in my early teens, and as a young as a Jewish kid, I was not unaccustomed to Holocaust narratives. They're kind of, Jewish Americans grow up with Holocaust narratives, and yet I found the very premise of a young man who's a Jew who must pretend to be a Nazi in order to survive, I found this profoundly disturbing. More so than more gruesome representations I recall seeing. But you could extend this same question of moral ambiguity to the episodes that you filmed for the HBO's series The Wire, which I think is a profoundly important television series. Movies like A Woman Alone in your early work, or The Third Miracle. They're often about moral compromise. And in fact, one episode that you filmed of The Wire, I believe, is titled Moral Midgetry. Charlatan also portrays a character who, as you point out, combines this kind of saintly quality with cruel personal qualities. And we had two questions really. One is, what draws you so consistently to this as a subject, and then the second question is, do you find that they're just either in the storytelling or in your own thinking about the questions of morality, do you find that there are particular payoffs or pitfalls, real liabilities, dangers that come with writing and filming so often about moral ambiguity?
Yes, I don't know what the truth is, but I know that the simplification is a lie. And I felt it very strongly from the time when I was really young, and maybe it was exactly that I was living in the polarized society where the official propaganda made very clear distinction between the right and bad. And I because I had the mixed identity, and this mixed identity in post-war Poland was something with the tension, because it was a latently anti-Semitic country all the time. So it was a lot of complication already inside of myself, of my own identity when I was growing. And then when I started to watch the world in the broader, as a broader spectrum, I've seen that it's always complicated and complex. And even the saints have some dark spots inside of their life, of their choices. Saul and Paul is the example of that, very, very symbolic. But everybody practically, and I understood that what interests me the most is this fight between, mostly inside of the human being. It's Mikołajek and Charlatan is perfect example of that, but also to some extent the hero of In Darkness, between the good and the evil, and to see him, and to show how thin is the line between one and other, and that we as a human being, during our short stay on this planet, we are walking on this thin line. Sometimes, it's supported by the earth around, and sometimes it's in the earth, in the air. So and we can fall very easily on one or another side, and that is for me one of the main human drama. So it's probably why I'm expressing it. And even with Mr. Jones, which is the film maybe the most openly some kind of the warning. So maybe the division who is right and who is wrong is much clearer. But even them showing Walter Durant as a bad guy, I am supporting his agenda by very nice women like Ada, and by George Orwell himself to some extent. So I'm showing that it's not so simple, even with the bad guys who are serving very bad agenda.
That's great, but can I draw you just again to the second part of the question? Do you find personally that there's some, I can see what the benefits are, because it always dealing with moral ambiguity, of course, generates stories, interesting stories. And for someone who wants to tell complex stories, this is the real source. But are there pitfalls? Are there dangers with trying to tell a morally complex tale? Are you ever worried that you might be overly sympathetic to people who are just bad actors, not in the sense of not in the sense of stagecraft?
Yes, and it happened sometimes that I was misunderstood, especially for the people who wanted very clear distinction. But in the same time, it's my own private war against simplification, which especially now takes, I think, very difficult. It is quite difficult because it is easy when you have like evil like the Nazis and the rest and the victims like Jews. It's pretty easy to say on which side is the light. Uh, but even then, of course, when you are entering the fabric of that and start to watch the human individuals, you see that not every Jew is traitorous and not every Nazi is a potential criminal. So everything is even in this very clear, symbolically clear distinction has some shade of colors. Uh, but today we are living in these societies, and I think it works for America and for Poland, which are quite similar right now in terms of the moral and intellectual approach to the reality. The polarization pushes us to some kind of the of the of the of the of the how to tell it, that is 0 1. It's not like
Like a
it's not
binary.
ambiguous. Yeah. mhm.
Mm.
It's not ambiguous at all, and it takes out also something which I think is the main reason and subject for somebody who is using the audiovisual or literary narration: empathy, to wake up the empathy. If you cannot have empathy for the murderer, you are useless as an artist. Uh, it's if not, you are just painting, the lives of saints, hagiography, which is difficult, of course, to do it in the convincing way. And I know it myself because I have some characters who are noble, like Gareth Jones, like Jan Palak, for example, like Father Alec in To Kill a Priest, which was some kind of the Jerzy Popiełuszko murder movie. And I know how difficult it was to make them exactly lively and convincing. Uh, so, um, uh, so, uh, so yes, I can be misunderstood, and I can be even attacked, especially if I am expressing it this attitude out of my film. Recently, I was attacked by some um, um, extreme left feminist in Poland because I said in some interview that I have the pity or compassion for the fate of Roman Polanski right now. And the attack was very brutal. And this woman, and not only she, it was like it's a wave, um, told that I don't have the right to have the empathy for him. I have to have the empathy for the victims. Um, and of course, I have the empathy for the victims, and I feel for them for many reasons, also personal reasons. But it doesn't mean that I cannot to try to understand the destiny of the man who happened to be the perpetrator in some point, and to see what is what are his quality, or what is his suffering, and what is the justice, and so on and so on. So anyway, anytime when I see that the society, for the noblest possible reason, decide that somebody is a scapegoat, I feel the same kind of the refusal or anger when I see that the society, for very mean reason, is using the same tool.
That's a great response, actually. I wanted to pick up on one thing you said, and then I'm going to give the microphone back to my colleague Johannes. Um, you just mentioned one name you just mentioned a moment ago, which is especially iconic in Central Europe, and for those of us who study Central Europe, is Jan Palach. And I mean especially iconic because he exists almost only as an icon, as a visual symbol, right? And for those of us, for those of our audience who may not be familiar with Jan Palach, Palach was a 20-year-old student who in 1968 immolated himself to protest the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. One of the more for me, striking works that Agnieszka Holland has done in the last 10 years is something that I'm afraid many people in the United States will not have seen because it was made for HBO Europe. It is accessible, but you have to go looking for it, and it's called Burning Bush, and it's a 3-part miniseries about the events surrounding Jan Palach's suicide as protest. Now, this is something that you have a very personal connection to. You yourself were a film student in Prague at the time of these events. You were arrested by the authorities and imprisoned. And it's also a story that you have returned to. The Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia forms the backdrop to Milan Kundra's novel *The Unbearable Lightness of Being*, which was also made into a successful film, and as I recall, you were the first person to translate that novel into Polish. But what is so fascinating to me about the way you approach Jan Palach's suicide in this miniseries is that you really emphasize the non-iconic lives around this iconic image. You emphasize his family, the other students, everyday people who are just encountering this as a shocking event that occurred in public on the street. Could you speak a little bit about why you thought it was important to revisit this particular moment in 2013 when you made this series? And has your own thinking about this personal experience and these events that affected you personally, has it changed much in the decades since?
I don't think so. I decided I always wanted to speak about my Czechoslovak experience because it was the formative experience of my life, as well the explosion of the freedom, the carnival of the freedom, as Kundera was referring to, and the crash of the freedom by the Soviet Polish, uh, and especially the so-called normalization. It means when the people realize that they are defeated, the quickness and the easiness with which they accepted, the return of the regime in the worst form even, and accommodated into that. This conformization of the society and the mechanisms of this conformization and the difficult, lonely, the people who found the courage or was like touched by this gene of the courage or justice, who've been opposing the regime, which was really difficult psychologically, economically, and socially. So it was the subject which was formative in the way that after I've seen, the history at the present and different events in the present, and like, for example, solidarity movement in Poland, and the capacity of the courage in the wider society. So, and Czechs never really did anything substantial in terms of the films or series about this time. So when I received the script from the very young students of the film school, and I referred to that, I found it extremely accurate and explaining exactly not only my memory, but like making vivid again my feelings from the time. I received it as a gift, you know, to express something which was one of my like personally the most important experience. And the fact that we don't see practically, except of the very first last moments of his life, Jan Palach, I found it very right. And you know, I was proved, at least to myself, because a few years later, the Czech, young Czech filmmaker made the movie called Jan Palach, and it was like the reconstruction of the life of Jan Palach. And I don't think that it worked, you know. It was the vignettes of his life which didn't add in anything which could explain what forever. So yeah, sometimes you have to find the way to speak about somebody without speaking about him, because his act was somehow his icon, but in the first place, his act which changed the society. My feeling, even then, in '69, when it happened, was that what Jan Palach did accelerated the conformization of the society. The first reaction of the nation was, you know, to the national grief, the national reunion. But it lasted maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, and after a month later, when another student did the same thing, because the the questions Palak put into his last letter was not answered by the authorities, no one wanted to hear about it, and his death like reminded nothing, you know. It stayed completely like not noticed. So um, so I was thinking to myself, I was thinking for myself that the people suddenly waited the choice. If we have to fight for the freedom, it means maybe to make the sacrifice of our lives. If we will accept the oppression, it will be not very pleasant, but we'll survive, and maybe we'll find the way to survive in pretty pleasant way. And of course, they choose the life. Uh, and somehow, you know, I understand them. Those who are able to sacrifice their lives in the situations like that is different when it's regular war. Yeah, you are pushed into this sacrifice. But in the normal civic society, which lives better or worse in more or less oppressive under more or less oppressive regime, the everyday life, you don't even, most of the people don't even feel that they are oppressed. Most people even don't feel that they are in some kind of the cage. And I remember um, when the communists fall apart in Czechoslovakia finally in 1989, I was talking to Miloš Forman, and he was very skeptical about the success of this freedom. And he said, you know, it's like with zoological garden and the jungle. The communists, it was like the zoological garden. The animals are in the cages, but they are fed and they are safe because they are isolated one from other. The capitalism is like the jungle. You are free, but you can die of by many reasons. You know, attacked by the big animal, or because you don't find the food or whatever. So somebody who was raised and know the safety of the zoological garden cannot really survive well in this wild world of the freedom. I think it was pretty good metaphor, which is coming back more often during last 10 years, exactly, when we see on one hand this nostalgic for you know for the authoritarian society, and the disillusion with the free market, and especially the democracy, which gives you some choices, at least the appearance of the choices. So yes, Moses, when he led the chosen people from Egypt to home, to Jerusalem, he like was um, leading them for 40 years over the different territories, because he wanted that the generation which remember the slavery can die. And now we are living much longer, right? We are living till 100 years. So I think that we have to wait till the generation will die.
I was going to say we've made a long circle from the comparison of fascism and Stalinism to the comparison of communism and capitalism, but now we're in biblical times, so I'm not exactly sure where we are, and I'm just going to shift gears a little bit.
I think that means we're in the desert.
That we're in the desert, which
Well,
yeah,
let's hope.
yeah,
Let,
that's right.
let,
Let's hope. I was also tempted. There's a path in the desert that I'm not going to explore, which would have been tempting, that you opened up by comparing Burning Bush to the other Paloff movie. I think there'd be a lot of interesting comparisons to make between Agnieszka Holland movies and other less successful versions of doing that. But I want to ask a different type of question, which is to take advantage of the fact that we have you here as somebody who, as far as I can see, has a really unparalleled vantage point on the industry you work in. I can think of very few people who have worked like you in Western and Eastern Europe and in Hollywood, but also in film, feature film, and television, and who've embraced television in the way you've had and made huge contributions to the medium. So we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the challenges, but also the appeals of working across media in film and in television, to the degree that you see a distinction, as well as the appeal of working across the Atlantic in the way you've done it. What does it, do you still see distinctions between what goes on in Europe and what goes on in the US, or is it a globalized film industry where everybody does the same thing, regardless of where you are?
No, certainly it is not, at least in terms of the movies. But we are now in the situation when the landscape can change dramatically anyway, because of the COVID and its consequences, and also the change of the generation, which is the new generation is more used to live in some kind of the virtual world and to connect with the content through the electronic media, rather than leave their room and their screen, and go someplace exactly to the jungle of the city. Um, and the COVID, of course, attacked in the first place some industries, and it was tourist industry, it was the hotels and the gastronomy. But in the first place, I think, and maybe the most destroying place, attacked the entertainment business. So the cinema, the theater, the concerts are the first victim of that. And when you watch the possible bankruptcy on several cinemas and distributors, and the score of the movies in the theater, even after the first wave of the pandemic in most of the world, became much like milder. It is scary. It is scary, and it may turn the distribution even much more than before to the VOD platforms or streaming platforms, which is not a bad thing. But for me, who tells takes the film as a experience and also sensual experience, it is a huge difference to watch it on the even pretty big screen home and to watch it on the huge screen and in the dark theater, so with other people. So I will be extremely sad, and it means also to rethink the way you are making movies, because if you it can be the blow for the smaller, independent, and more personal movies, because economically, any movie is pretty costly. Even very, low budget movie costs more than just, I don't know, write the poem. Um, and without the new economy, it will be very difficult to, to survive. So now we are in this moment as a filmmaker that we are asking ourselves the questions, if it will pass or it is the very important blow, and only after we'll start to think how it will be for Americans, how it will be for Europeans. Europeans are mostly financed by some public funds, which makes possible more more personal and less commercial expression, which has ups and downs. Up is obvious, I said it. It's more free, it's more personal. Downs are that the filmmakers become lazy and they are not fighting for the audience as much as they could and should. And the festivals, the main festivals, and also the majority of the film critic is supporting this attitude, this kind of the glass tower, which had pretty bad consequences for the cinema, I think, altogether, because something which I am attracted to and which I call the cinema of the middle. It means the cinema which is able to raise important and complex questions in personal way, but in the same time are trying to make the story as interesting as possible and have some kind of the plot which attracts people and make those stories accessible for the wider audience. It practically started to disappear and practically disappeared.
So it's
You have every year you have few movies like that, mostly made for the Oscar seasons, but they are few movies only. Yes, you wanted to ask me?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that you that you go into the direction of thinking about the audience and, as you said, fighting for the audience, which clearly must also be in the interest of the filmmaker. I was going to rephrase the question in a slightly different direction, which is to ask about your, I guess, about the extent of your control over what you do. In quite specific ways. So again, I think of your work as striking, really striking, in the sense that you found this, what you're calling the cinema of the middle, without abandoning a signature. It's an Agnieszka Holland movie. One knows when one sees it, and that's an incredible accomplishment, I think, and an achievement. So I'm curious, because you have this experience of working for huge series like The Killing or House of Cards, where all the characters must have been established a long time before you ever joined the project, and the storyline spelled out, and you presumably brought in to direct competently 3 episodes and then move out for somebody else. As opposed to things like the Jan Palach, the Burning Bush, which is clearly a project that is dear to your heart and sounds like it was a great work of collaboration with these young screenwriters. And I know that you have your own career as a screenwriter. I think I know that you do a lot of editing also, although I'm curious to what degree you have Final Cut on your projects and how much editing.
Mostly I have Final Cut, but I'm not editing myself, physically. It means I'm present at the editing, but not doing it myself. My daughter is editing herself her films.
I mean, I'd ask even the same question about cinematography when I look at a film like charlatan, which, you know, clearly there's a lot of cinematographic decision making going on in the background to pull this off. How much of that is yours, and how much do you want to preserve as yours, and how much are you just happy to walk into a project like The Wire and say, I'm happy to be a part of this important moment in the industry?
Well, you know, it's a big difference when I'm doing the episodic television, especially when I'm not formatting it. For example, Treme, I did format. I made the first episode, and I formatted in pretty ambitious way. Even maybe it was a bit difficult to follow by somebody. But the other things, yes, I was serving somebody's vision, trying to add a bit of myself into that, especially with The Wire or The Killing, it was possible. With House of Cards, it was difficult because it was so like strictly and stiffly formatted series that I was just fighting for for little things, like, for example, that the lens will be not always 35, but maybe 50 sometimes, you know. Or I succeed even once and put 60, with the big revolt from the, you know, camera operator, who was the guardian of the flame from the first episode made by David Fincher. Yeah, sometimes it's some kind of the stylistic exercise. Sometimes it's a journey. Both Treme and The Wire was for me an incredible journey to the reality of America, of to the tragedy of American cities, which I will never experience in such a, you know, vivid way if I didn't do this series by myself and went like deeper into the, you know, mechanism of that. And of course, David Simon is incredibly, you know, incredibly ambitious and courageous guide to this political and social reality. So yeah, I'm grateful for this experience, not as a filmmaker even, but as a human being, or, you know, the citizen or whatever. And mostly when I was doing that, and I may do it less now. It started to bore me a bit. You know, it was because it was the quick boost of the energy. It took not more than 2-3 months of my life, and, you know, and I did something, you know, which was renovating myself somehow. And but when I'm doing the feature film or miniseries, it is different. It is entirely, you know, expression of my soul and my skills and my vision of the world. And of course, I'm collaborating with the cinematographer, with the editor, with the production and costume designer, with the composer. But in the same time, this collaboration is based um, on my vision somehow, and you know, and I'm choosing the people who I know that have similar kind of the sensibility, and they are adding something, you know, to my vision and expanding it and making it better for sure, or more original or deeper. So it is a true collaboration, but in the same time, in the first place, I feel less or more where I want to go. And about, you know, about the cinema as a middle, I'm thinking not only, you know, the films which are like purely commercial. I'm thinking of the films d'auteur as well. I think that Federico Fellini was cinema in the middle, you know, at least in his times, and Andrzej Wajda, and, you know, and François Truffaut, and Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese and Hal Ashby, and you know, it means and Ingmar Bergman even. So they've been auteurs, but in the same time, they made the effort to tell the stories in the way which attracted people and which, you know, was accessible even for the people without great cinematic culture.
I'm just reading a book about Thomas Mann in America. And it makes a very strong argument for Thomas Mann as helping reinvent something that Americans would call the middle brow. which can sound derogatory, but the book is actually making the point that this is a great achievement of Thomas Mann's in his period in America to help generate an idea of the middle brow that is compatible with the work of somebody who we consider one of the greats of modernism, Thomas Mann. Do you want to take us out, Benjamin, with the last question?
I feel flattered to be called Benjamin. It reminds me at least of Walter Benjamin.
My head was with Thomas Mann in the German.
Ego fly, but Agnieszka Holland, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I did want to. We had a whole raft of other more technical questions. Johannes and I had been talking about your use of color, especially color filtering, and I think you've touched on that a little bit. But I have a different technical question that I find I'm asking everyone I've been talking to in the last few months, because I think we have all been experiencing something quite unprecedented. It's now been about 7 months for most of us stuck inside, and it will be several more months. And it's a difficult set of conditions under which to work, as you've indicated. But I keep looking for the silver lining. And the, if necessity is the mother of invention, potrzeby jest matką wynalazku, right? Have you found that there are any adaptations to this kind of work, as I found in tiny little things in my teaching or in my research, having to do it basically at this desk in a basement? Are there little things that you found in kind of working under COVID conditions that you think maybe are useful, that you might continue after COVID conditions? Or is this a period of our life and our work that we should just try to forget as quickly as it's over?
Well, I'm afraid we will forget it. And what is typical for pandemics, that they are forgotten much quicker than other experience like the war, When you are, not now, but, a few years ago, when you are met into the Google, the Spanish flu. It was very few, sites about it. And the First World War or Second World War, it was like millions. And in reality, the pandemic, the Spanish flu killed more people than the First and Second War altogether. So somehow, I think that the best what can happen out of this pretty mild virus in comparison will be if it will become the global experience for the generation, because I think that this generation needs some kind of the common experience to come out with the new vision of the world, because we need new vision. The world is old, is sclerotic. It's enough to see two presidential candidates in America. We really need the renewal and the new generation, taking in a real way the challenges, the challenges of the present and of the modernity. So I hope that it will be maybe the output of the pandemic, that it will be some kind of the global, brain will be born out of that. If not, for the filmmaker, it's nothing good in that, because I supposed to do the TV series for Apple TV, shot in Paris, the new series, which I supposed to shoot from mid-September, and it was cancelled because of the virus and complexity of the problems. And it is very complicated and not extremely rewarding to shoot under the pandemic's restrictions. It is a pain in the ass in reality. And what suddenly started to land on my desk, it was several scripts sent by different producers with the notion COVID friendly. COVID friendly, it means that it happens in 1 or 2 or 3 rooms, you know, very few locations, very few characters, not really erotic scenes too much, certainly not the extras. And yeah, and maybe it will be something, you know, it was some COVID-friendly, very good movies made in last years without COVID. Like, for example, I don't know if you've seen and remember the movie called Log with Tom Hardy driving the car.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which was only the car and the Tom Hardy and the phone,
Mm-hmm.
or another movie of this kind which was shot like 2 years ago, Danish, I think, or Swedish, I don't remember, a film called Guilty, which about you know about the policeman in one room talking to some criminal or some anyway to trying to avoid some crime happen. So you know it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you know forgetting about all those big extravaganzas and thinking about the something small and essential but very good, because it has to be very good if you want to keep the attention of the people for 2 hours with something so restricted, that it will be really good exercise of our you know very non-focused brain. And I thought that I would be more focused and that I will do a lot of like intellectual work, like reading and you know watching. In reality, I didn't. And I didn't because I'm connected to internet, and the internet, it's taking my brain to every place. And especially when you know, I was not even watching the series which I wanted to watch, just to even you know to feel like taken by the stories, because the series made by the reality was much more exciting and original, like you know all the pandemics story in different countries on different stage. After it was the series about Polish presidential election, incredibly interesting and very unpleasant, but you know still fascinating series. The series of American elections, which will have this finale pretty soon. It's also more exciting certainly than you know if it will be next season of the House of Cards. Believe me, it will be not so surprising like this reality. So I'm right now connected
Although
to the reality.
Although I
Yeah.
wanted to interject there that if, you know, because we've been talking about this a lot, that if we actually did have a fictional series in which the you know the quasi-authoritarian president rails against a virus as being a fiction, and then he catches the virus, that would never make it to TV because we would say, no, this is too cliche, this is too unbelievable, it's too contrived. And yet when it actually is a reality, it's quite entertaining in some bizarre way.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, you see that the fictional character went down off the screen and starting to live in the real world. And so it is very difficult to compete in the fiction with them. So I'm putting my brain into some kind of the you know the utopic series, which will be believable and really will change our vision. Because dystopic, we have enough. We have enough. The dystopia already happened. The reality.
Maybe that's the that's the place to stop a Zoom interview that will be put somewhere on in the internet for people to watch in a distant future that we don't yet know.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I just say what a pleasure it's been to talk to you? And again, I wish this had taken place in Ann Arbor and we could go and have a beer now and follow up, and that will have to wait.
Yes.
But we look forward to when it happens again.
Me
and
too.
in the meantime, we wish you all the best, and please keep making the kinds of art that you're making.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for these conversations and questions. Very inspiring. And give my best to everybody in Ann Arbor. I have very vivid memories of my stay there. Didn't realize that it was 8 years already. So
Well,
I
we hope to have you here again in person in a less virtual format.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Vote
much.
well as well.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.